So we talked about ourselves as the Episcopal Church and how we, from the congregational level all the way through all 7,000 congregations, how we interact with one another and how we interact with the world. Another way that we interact with the world is through our membership in the Anglican community. The Anglican community is it's an association of all times national and regional churches, and it's not a governing body. But there are 85 million Anglicans who belong to all these different churches. And when you contrast that with the fact that there are fewer than 2.5 million Episcopalians, that's pretty significant. It means the Anglican Church has a large presence in the world. There are 44 world church members in the Anglican community. Traces its heritage all the way back to the beginnings of Christianity and certainly to the founding of the Church of England. And the head, or the symbolic head, of the Anglican community is the Archbishop of Canterbury. In any province or country, there can only be one member of the Anglican community that is in full communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. And in the U.S., it's the Episcopal Church. The bishops of all the different world churches meet every year, 2 years, sometimes 3 years apart, to talk about issues that are important to the worldwide community. And formally, the communion gets together every 10 years in the Lambeth Conference in Canterbury. That conference is presided over by the Archbishop, and it strives to express the mind of the communion on the issues of the day. And it passes resolutions and drafts all kinds of things that are really non-binding on its members, but its job is to try to express the mind of the communion. And there are 44 members. Y'all write this down so you'll be sure. This is the list of the churches that are members of the Anglican community. Some of them have interesting names like Hong Kong, Shen Kong Wei. It's interesting also to note that there are 142 other churches around the world with either the words Episcopal or Anglican in their names that are not members of the Anglican community. And that's largely because of two things. One is the rule that there only can be one from each country, and another is that some churches embrace some of the aspects of being in full communion with the Archbishop, but the other stuff they don't want to mess with. But they like kind of being Anglican. So here's what we look like worldwide. Remember when we were talking about the provinces in the Episcopal Church, that's this territory right here. There were 9 provinces, but all of that makes up just one province in the Anglican community. There are a total of 34 provinces. 4 united churches, and the united churches are mostly in India and Pakistan, South India, North India, Pakistan, that area. And what those are ecumenical associations of Protestant churches, Anglican, Presbyterian, Methodist, Baptist, Lutheran, that have come together under an ecumenical agreement that allow them to be in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. So that's what the united churches are. And then there are some other small churches that are outside provinces, extra provincial, but are under the direction of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Things like the Falkland Islands, the church in Spain, some of the other just smaller outlying areas. But that's what makes up the Anglican community there worldwide. So we're pretty present. And the Anglican Church is one of the fastest growing churches in the world. While the Episcopal Church is declining in membership, the Anglican Church and Water is growing.
Isn't that the largest part of that is in Africa?
Yes, Africa and Asia. Africa primarily, yes. Absolutely. So, we are trying to figure out, in the midst of all this growth, how we get along. And, Alan, back there on the table, there are copies of the Anglican Covenant. If you would like to just sort of distribute those. This is something that is being developed now in response to a number of issues that have been developing over the past years. Pressures within the communion, discussions that are taking place because the communion is growing so fast and it's distributed among a bunch of different cultures and polities and backgrounds and beliefs. So we've come together and we've drafted this thing called the Anglican Covenant. It's an attempt to hold the communion together in the face of increasing fragmentation. It's not an attempt to choose between intensifying our relationships or allowing fragmentation to continue. It doesn't seek to tell us what doctrine is or how to worship, and it's not a contract. It's based on the family or kinship model of a variety of different churches and how they can operate together and hold together. It talks about belief, mission, church, and relational consequences. It tries to strike a balance between maintaining communion with one another and dealing with the issues of autonomy and accountability. And it tries to strike that middle way, which is so difficult to do. We're having this debate because we've always had this debate. As far back as the founding of Christianity, the early church fathers decided which books were going to be in the Bible and who was going to interpret them. And when other writings that sought to have individual relationships with God through revelation were developed and practiced, those were outlawed as heretical. So the church from the very beginning has decided how Scripture would be interpreted. And from about 400 all the way up through the 16th century, everybody pretty much agreed on what the books of the Bible were, but they weren't really dogmatized by the Catholic Church until the 16th century. That's when they became part of church doctrine. And what that really means is the church can tell you what Scripture means. Elizabeth apparently didn't take too kindly to that, and so she catechized it. They passed through Parliament the 39 Articles of Religion, which define what it means to be Anglican. And the essence of the argument is that interpretation of Scripture is up to the individual, not the church. The church can't tell you how to believe. And so that sounds like a pretty good thing. We can all decide what Scripture means to us, but the basic conflict it sets up is that since all Christians are supposed to be subject to the Bible, then there should never be any disagreement. But I think you all know better than that. I mean, we've heard arguments supported by Scripture on completely opposing views. And so as the church developed, we had things like, Richard Hooker wrote The Laws of Ecclesiastical Polity, which is a series of books on really how the church is to be operated, and sort of an operating manual for the church. And that's where we get our concepts of Scripture, tradition, and reason, is from the Laws of Ecclesiastical Polity. And that sort of helped moderate the issues. still, those things are open to interpretation. Scripture certainly is open to individual interpretation. Tradition, a wide variety of traditions in the Anglican Church, especially over recent terms. And reason sometimes just goes out the window. But we've had a big change in the Anglican community over the last 100 years. As long as it was basically a Western church, a Western organization, there could be general agreement. Some discussion over things like ordination of women and how much you had to adhere to the 39 articles of religion. By the way, that document that was passed in the 16th century is in our prayer book in the back under historical documents. But as recently as the 1950s, the Church of England required their clergy, as a condition of entering seminary, to sign an agreement that they subscribe to the 39 articles of religion. We don't do that anymore. But the pressures that have been building up because of the increase in the number of members in the Anglican communion and the different cultures have really brought this thing sort of to a head. And in 2003, when the Diocese of New Hampshire ordained Gene Robinson as bishop, that was kind of that tossed the match on the pile of kindling. It's not the reason for the Anglican covenant, but it is sort of the flashpoint that brought all this discussion to culmination. So this coming year, most of the world churches are going to be voting on whether to adopt the Anglican covenant. Some churches have already voted this year. It's only been rejected by one church, and that's the church in the Philippines. Mexico, the West Indies, Myanmar, and Southeast Asia, the province of Southeast Asia, have already either approved it or have passed resolutions in support of it. The big churches, the big members, the Episcopal Church, Australia, Church of England, Japan, New Zealand, those churches in the coming year will be having their general conventions or the equivalent, and they'll be voting on this. If it doesn't pass, then the Anglican communion will change in some way. We don't know how. Best case, it could just emerge as an agreement to disagree among the family members, or worst case, it could just lead to complete schism in the Anglican community. And it could be that the Episcopal Church may no longer be the American representative, the U.S. representative in the Anglican community. We just don't know how it's going to come down. And we don't really know how our church is going to vote. A lot of dioceses around the country have already rejected, in their councils, have already rejected the Anglican community. A lot of them support it. Those who say that they are against it say that it's un-Anglican because it allows a body to try to force its rules and rules of behavior and rules of association on local churches, and it takes away their autonomy and their ability to deal with local congregations. They say that's un-Anglican. And the supporters say that really it's the essence of being Anglican because it holds all those different institutions and tries to seek that middle way. So there are arguments on both sides. We don't know how it's going to come down, but it'll be a pivotal year this coming year in the life of the Anglican community and in the life of our church. Whatever happens, it all starts here at All Saints with us. Because
we who are many are one body, for we all share the one bread. So, Gary, does the Episcopal Church of the United States, when do we vote, and when's that?
2012, the General Convention is about mid-year.
June-ish?
That date, yeah, it's in the summer.
And that'll take place where? Do you know?
I don't know this year. Do you know where the General Convention is, where it's meeting? It rotates.
Okay.
But it'll, we elected our delegates at council last year. And
To go to General
to go to
Convention.
General
Okay.
Convention.
And then our council's this February, and we'll be voting, our own diocese will be voting on this at council?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. We sure will. And that vote will be taken to General Convention.
Yeah, and so do they have are they required to vote as we say, or do they have the freedom to, once they're there?
My understanding is that the delegates, the deputies that attend the convention are free to vote. I don't think it's a directed vote. I think they're free to vote. The bishops are certainly free to vote however they want to vote. But by and large, they will try to express the sense of their diocesan members.
Right.
I'm assuming this will be something that has to be voted on both houses.
Both houses have to pass it before it has any effect. That's the same in General Convention, it's the same in anything.
Gary, I think it needs to maybe be clear that one of the big debates has to do with Richard Hooker's threefold tests of truth, that because there's a great argument afoot to claim that Holy Scripture is more important than reason and tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And so a whole lot of the argument tends to be around that. And then, of course, there is a claim that there's a fourth leg of the stool now I can't ever get it quite right, but what's going on in the modern, currently in the society, social issues have a place in that on that stool someplace. But you'll hear a whole lot in the debate about whether or not Scripture should be paramount and a thicker leg than reason and tradition.
It'll be an interesting argument.
Any other questions for Gary or Dee or in general?
Are we going to be, as a parish, are we as a parish going to be discussing this prior to
We'll be
council?
discussing it. It'll be part of it will be discussed at our pre-council meeting. We're hosting the pre-council meeting for the diocese this year, and it's around
Or convocation?
20. When is it? 18.
Yeah.
18th of January or December? Okay.
January.
So that's one way our convocation gets together every year to discuss what's coming
Yeah, we
before
have
council.
pre-council meetings and different convocations. They have 7 pre-council meetings, and ours from the Southern Convocation this year will be here in Los Angeles. We'll be hosting it.
Well, and it was different in the fact that we may be actually discussing something at more length in terms of the covenant. Basically, pre-council is to introduce you to council, let you know what's coming up, and answer your questions before you go. This time may involve more discussion about this issue.
Probably will, because it'll be voted on at council this year.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a hot topic.
If you all think it would be of interest, we could try to do something with the Anglican covenant after the first of the year. There was an effort by the clergy of this Corpus Christi, I think last spring or fall, a year ago, to talk about the covenant. And from what Yeah,
It's coming to be critical now.
yeah, it was theory back then, so.
Right.
So, you know, if you all think there's an interest in this, we can try to do something to at least go through it a little.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions, comments?
Thank you all.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Dee, Phyllis, Dale, Allison. Who else is done this? Everybody. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful presentation. And thank you to John and Gail and Pam and Janine for providing hospitality today, and Suzanne, we're praying